Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Captain Lou's Champions of Sports History on this Tuesday, August the 13th, 2024. We're all getting ready for football season. It's just around the corner. College football starting up about 2.5 weeks from now. And, of course, the pros a week later, right after Labor Day weekend, we get set for another NFL football season. It's going to be an exciting one indeed. So we thought we would stick with the football theme this week and take a look back at a couple of cool interviews we've done here on Captain Lou's Champions of Sports History. A while back, we had a chance to sit down and talk with Randy Cross from the Super Bowl champions San Francisco 49ers 1984 season and that run that they had. And, of course, last week, we had a chance to sit down and talk to longtime ESPN personality and Denver Gazette columnist Woody Page as he talked about the 97 Broncos and their Super Bowl run and, of course, some of the teams before that. So a couple of fun interviews that we had a chance to bring to you, and we thought we would take a look back at some of those interviews. The show, as always, brought to you by tickets.12ouncesports.com. We're live right here on 12 Ounce Sports and, of course, on Dingo TV, channel 217, and the Captain Lou Sports Network on YouTube. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, Randy Cross stopped by, as we mentioned, and we'll take a look at that interview right after this here on Captain Lou's Champions of Sports History.
Need tickets to that next event? Well, at 12 Ounce Sports, we've got them with soccer anywhere in the world. Tickets to any venue, any sport. Want to go to NCAA or NFL football matches? We've got them. Yeah. Baseball at every level. Every Power 5 matchup is available. Don't forget, costumes and paint are optional. What's that? You want to go to Broadway? We have those too. Want to jam out? Every concert, every artist. That's right. At 12 Ounce Sports, we've got the tickets for less. 12ozsports.com/tickets. That's 12ouncesports.com/tickets.
To Captain Lou's championship years in sports history. Of course, we are highlighting 1984, and we thought nothing better than to get one of the more dominant teams in professional football history, the NFL history, than the 1984/85 San Francisco 49ers. And we are excited and pleased to bring in a member of that team, Randy Cross. Randy, thanks for taking time out to be with us. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing really well. Yeah, that was a fun period of time. It really was. I mean, it's funny you talk about dominant teams. You go 84, 85, 86, those three consecutive years. The NFL had three as dominant teams, back to back to back as we've ever seen.
Well, I would be remiss, based out of Michigan here. I have to ask you, the year before that, you played the Detroit Lions in the playoffs in the opening round at Candlestick, and you guys scored the touchdown to go ahead with about a minute and a half left. Detroit got the ball, went right down. So I have to ask you, were you like Monty Clark on your side of the field, praying to the gods that Eddie Murray on that kick? I know he was praying for him to make it. Were you praying for him to miss it?
Pretty much. Pretty much. That's about all you have to resort to when you're in those situations. And
yeah,
when you're doing it against a guy that kicked as well as Eddie did, you're usually kind of whistling through the graveyard, just wishing and hoping.
Yeah. So, but yeah, unfortunately for us, it didn't work out. He didn't quite get it to hook. But, and then I won't dwell too much on the following game because you guys came up a little bit short. But obviously, I'm sure you used that coming into training camp in that dominant year of 84.
Yeah, there wouldn't have been an 84 Niner team, I don't believe, as good as we were. And as dominant as we were, if it hadn't been for that motivation of losing that 83 NFC Championship game in DC, especially the way we kind of did.
Yeah,
you know, we got behind big, we stormed back, and then depends on whether you're a Skins fan. I'm sorry, I said Redskins, or a 49er fan. It depends on how you look at those penalties towards the end of the game and the points that ensued. But that motivated, I know it motivated me. And I know plenty of guys on that team have talked about sort of the fire that instilled in us coming into that next year.
You know, it's amazing. I looked at your 94 or your 84 roster, and, you know, coming into training camp, if I'm not mistaken, Randy, you only had one rookie that made that final roster coming out of training camp, coming into that opening game.
Yeah, I believe it was Michael Carter.
I believe so.
But yeah, because he was coming off the Olympics in LA that year. Right after that is when he joined us because we drafted him. But yeah, it was a stacked team, and that was the best team I played on.
Yeah,
and I think a lot of that is a testament to the trading skills and the trading skills of Bill Walsh and the appeal of playing for Eddie DeBartolo.
Yeah,
helped to build that roster because the Chargers, for some reason, went brain dead from 81 to 84 and decided to give us Fred Dean and Gary Big Hands Johnson and Louis Kelcher. I mean, it was crazy because that team's known for Joe Montana.
right.
As, you know, most of his teams are, and for Roger Craig's big 3 touchdown game in the Super Bowl, and our offense was unstoppable that year. But that doesn't say anything or doesn't say nearly enough about, you know, Ronnie Lott and that defense. And if you go down that defensive side of the ball, I mean, there are some studs on that defense that made life miserable. I know Dan Marino will probably tell you that was true, but most everybody got to play against that defense would tell you the same thing.
Well, you know, and it's right. I think not only did you guys amass, I think 475 points on that team, but I think your defense gave up under 170 too. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. It was awesome all the way around. And, you know, that Miami Dolphin team that came into that Stanford Stadium for that Super Bowl had put up even more ridiculous numbers on the offensive side, especially Marino. And he barely had enough time to take a deep breath most of the time he was dropping back. That defensive line, and you go through, I talked about the 3 Chargers, but you know, Fred Dean, Dwayne Board, and just go down the rest of them. Michael Carter, the young guy at the nose tackle. That was crazy how good they were. And that year was fun because when you're on offense, you go to the sideline and Bob McKittrick, our old line coach, make his adjustments, and Bill come over and talk to us, and we go, And as soon as they got done, we'd get up and go to the sideline and get to watch whatever we could of the other team's offense trying to deal with our defense, which was, you know, kind of like watching a cat play with a fly.
So I know that you guys obviously had the motivation and the focus going into training camp, but you guys had played together for a while. Did that make it a little bit easier for you in training camp to get ready for the season? I mean, maybe more so not only playing with Joe Montana, but, you know, with you and Guy McIntyre and the rest of the offensive line. Did stuff like that make it easier for you in training camp?
Yeah, I mean, we had a guy was one of the young guys. Jesse Cipolla was there. He'd been there for a year or so by that point. But, you know, Bubba was at left tackle, and he was in his second or third year. But our original 4, you know, John Ayers, Fred Quillen, me, and Keith Fonhorth were still there.
Yeah.
And, you know, those 4 guys had also gone through back-to-back 2 and 14 years. So we had kind of a point of reference. You know, you talk about a great team. We also knew what it was like to be on one of the worst teams ever.
Mm. Yeah, it was kind of a slow start for you, I remember. And then, you know, you won the Super Bowl in 81 against Cincinnati. And so coming into 84, that was your first playoff loss that you experienced. So that had to have been a little bit of an adjustment too.
Yeah, it was. But, you know, after the dismal experience that was 1982 between the strike and we were 3-6, and the injuries we had, and just the way we played, and how bad we handled success. You to get in the playoffs in '83, to play as well as we did that season, get a playoff win, and get a chance to go back to the Super Bowl, was huge, and it made the loss bigger because I think we were so excited about getting that chance again.
Yeah,
but no, it was something to go through.
Can I ask you real quick? The only reason I want to ask you this, that's a great point you just brought up. Here locally, the Lions had one heck of a year. They went to the NFC Championship game, which they hadn't done. They've only done once in 65 years. How tough is it to handle success, being on top of the mountain? I mean, that had to have been an adjustment. Obviously, you said you didn't handle it the greatest in '82. I know you had the strike, but how difficult is that?
It's hard. It's hard, especially back in the early '80s. There were a lot of distractions.
Yeah.
Sociologically, party-wise, being in San Francisco, they'd never, the Giants had won some stuff. The Warriors had won some stuff. The Niners hadn't won anything.
Yeah.
Across the bay. I mean, if you wanted to see winning football early in my career, you went to the Raiders game in Oakland.
Okay.
But when we did that, and we had fun, and we kind of betrayed a lot of trust when it came to Bill Walsh, and I think he dealt with that team accordingly, and that helped make that team in '84 so good, and then those ensuing years.
Yeah.
Because from a loyalty standpoint, I don't think he felt the need to be quite as loyal to us the way that we had kind of betrayed that trust. And he did make some changes after that Super Bowl, which I think surprised a lot of people. But that '81 team won a Super Bowl, and I'm not positive on the real number. I think we had 14 to 15 guys that were on that roster for that Super Bowl in Pontiac, and we're not even on the roster for the opening day.
Wow.
Weren't on the roster. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good.
The opening day for that next year. I mean, not even to play the whole season, just on an opening day, because we over celebrated. Let's put it that way.
Well, get back to 1984. You opened up the season, ironically enough, with Detroit and Washington back to back. You took care of business. I know it was really tight. I actually was at that game. I was a sophomore at Central Michigan, so we went down there. It was Labor Day weekend, I think, and again, you beat us this time with a last-second field goal. I say us, the Lions. And the Lions ended up in their spiral after that. They lost Billy Sims, and it just fell apart. But you had a harder time again with Washington, but you got over the hump. How good did that feel, if you can remember? That was a Monday night game. I remember that.
Yeah. No, we had some great Monday night games against the Skins through the course of the years.
Yeah.
Between '84 and '88, and I think a few other years. It was fantastic. We knew going to Detroit was hard. We'd gone there before. It was one of the few indoor stadiums that I'd at that point gotten a chance to play in. I'd been in Seattle, but as far as those inflatable domes, that was the first time I'd been in that. And what made that difference was when you warmed up, it was one kind of field and it was one kind of air. And by the time that crowd got in there, and you remember, these are the days where they had smoking sections on airplanes. So they definitely had smoking sections in the stadium. So you'd look up and there'd be this layer of smoke in the stadium, and it would get humid. It would get more and more humid as the game went on. And I guess eventually technology kind of took care of that. But it was a huge home field advantage. You had to drink so much more water or Gatorade or whatnot than playing most anywhere else. And we dealt with the good teams early, and our Pittsburgh wasn't even one of the good teams. When we played them, we lost to them.
Well, I can remember what Bud Grant used to say about Detroit. It was like playing in an old-fashioned Western saloon back in the 1900s, he said, with that cigarette smoke in there. But you mentioned your loss to Pittsburgh, Randy. Yeah, it just goes to prove how tough it is to go undefeated. Obviously, only one other team did it since the Dolphins, and they didn't win the Super Bowl. So, I mean, when you did lose to, I don't want to overlook the wins you had, but obviously after that, you didn't miss a beat.
Yeah, no, and I'm not to minimize or denigrate anything the Dolphins did in that 14-game schedule and then the 3 games in the playoffs.
Yeah.
But, you do it, you start getting into those 18-0 like New England did. They became the 3rd team to go 18-1?
Yeah.
Which is exactly what you don't want to do. And they did it the exact way you don't want to do it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it'll ever happen, especially now that we're playing more regular season games.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure what New England did in going 18-0 to get to the Super Bowl, we may see that again, but I'd be extremely surprised if it happened.
I just, Randy, I don't see it happening either. And I'll tell you what, and obviously I didn't play professional football. I didn't play college football, but they don't practice as early or as hard as they used to in the preseason. I don't know. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I just don't know. That it just seems like it just takes a lot more out of these players now to be able to do that, than it may have been. I'm not saying it was easier to do back in your day, but it just seems like it might be.
Well, I think the Players Association has done a really good job of making the game safer.
Yes.
And the NFL has cooperated. But it shows, every single year you get week 1 and suddenly you're sitting there watching these games go by and you're saying, when did these guys forget how to tackle and block?
Yeah.
Well, if you don't do it live, it's kind of hard to do it, on demand on Sundays. And most teams don't do a whole lot of live work against their own guys. That's why you see so many teams scrimmage and play against other teams during training camp, is they need to get reps, against other guys where you are going live. But they've eliminated a lot of the stuff that goes on below the waist as far as blocking goes, which has helped defenses. But by the same token, they've taken away a lot of the mugging that they used to be able to do in the defensive backfields.
Yeah.
But no, I think the Players Association and the league has done the players a great favor. And I think, the guys that last a long time can thank them for that, because that's one of the reasons they've been able to do that.
Well, and also the ones that last a long time, I think they take care of their bodies a little better too. And, it kind of shows there.
Mm-hmm. Well, the training's a lot different. I came into the league right there at that transition time.
Okay.
And probably around our 84 team, maybe about 81 or so, was when things kind of shifted to full-time workouts. I'd be embarrassed to tell you what I made a year my first 5 years in the league. And that was the 5th year was a Super Bowl year.
Right.
But, as it got in, I finally got into, 6 figures. But it was totally different, because in the off season, you didn't have to, you could get by, but it really helped if you augmented your income by doing something different. I worked in the medical malpractice insurance business for 3 or 4 years when I first got in the league. And then I worked in the commodities business for a few years after that. And then that kind of got me into the point where, it's making enough where I didn't have to do that in the off season. But even, later in my career, I still did that. But the training is the big difference. And I tell people all the time, because they look at you sort of funny when they say training. I say, well, I'll tell you 2 quick things. One, I didn't lift a weight. And I'm not talking about consistently. I didn't lift weights until after my 2nd year in the NFL.
Wow.
Didn't touch them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Not even in college?
Didn't touch them in college.
Wow.
High school, I was number 2 in the country in the shot put. Threw it almost 68 feet in high school. Never touched a weight. It was all technique. It was all quickness. And it was all stuff that was able to use in football. It really transitioned over well for me.
Yeah.
But my son played quarterback, played at Wake Forest and played a little at UCLA, played in high school and whatnot. But he started training in about the 9th grade. And I mean working with a trainer, not the coaches in the weight room. 3 days a week, he's with a trainer.
Wow.
He was stronger as a junior than I was until my second year in the NFL when I actually discovered weights.
That's crazy. Wow, that's interesting. We're joined by 3-time Super Bowl champion Randy Cross from the 1984 Super Bowl champion San Francisco 49ers here on our championship years in sports history. Randy, you guys, like we mentioned, 15-1. You clinched the division early, and I looked by the scores. It didn't look like it took much to keep you motivated because you won out, but it didn't really look like you took the foot off the gas pedal.
No, and I think you got to credit the leadership, on our team. Especially a presence like Ronnie Lott, that would totally. I mean, all the time, he was very insistent. As was Bill Walsh about what you put out there. You are what you put on the field. And, if you're going to go out there, and you might as well kick their ass. Why? Why let up? Why ease into the playoffs? Because, the history of our game and the history of every other professional game is littered with teams that were great in the regular season, coasted, and then got smacked in the playoffs. And, coincidentally, a couple of years later, we did the exact same thing where we had probably the best team in the NFL, kind of eased into the playoffs and divisional round, lost that first game. And, that was a lesson I unfortunately had to learn. But I think the leadership in that organization, starting with those two guys specifically, I'd say really meant a lot. So
you clinch the division. You got an opening round playoff bye, because I think that was the year they started the wild card game. So then you took on the Giants. And I remember watching the game, and you guys gave up the pick 6 or whatever, but it didn't phase you, Randy. You just went right down and, led by Joe Cool, you got the touchdown to go up 21-10 at halftime. And that to me is one mark of a champion. It was like business as usual. You went right back to it.
Yeah, I think so. And, we were lucky. You mentioned Joe, we had Roger.
Yeah.
We had Dwight, we had Freddie. Our offensive line was really good. We had LT and Randy White kryptonite, and a left guard by the name of John Ayers, who just played out of his mind every time he got a chance to play against those two guys specifically. So when you're playing a team like the Giants, and you're lucky to be playing at home, and you're on a grass field that's a little soggy, it's an advantage. And, they have testaments of that is the way we played a couple of times at Giant Stadium later on. When
we won't get into that.
Yeah, we
won't. But I'm glad you mentioned that. Candlestick Park was such a home field advantage, back then. And you were really able to use it to your advantage for sure.
Well, the field was something, and you'd tell people all the time, and they'd look at you funny every single time. They'd ask you about the field, and I'd always tell them, say, hey, look, you might not notice this, but that field's below sea level. Wow. So if that bay out there is at high tide, that field's going to be wet. That water's got nowhere to go. And this is before the days of the cool air systems and the sub pumps and everything. They didn't have that. So if it was high tide-ish for the game, you knew going in that you'd have to wear the big cleats. And, especially in a playoff game, we always started fast. And that was one of the keys for us is there were a lot of people slipping and sliding, but they weren't wearing our uniforms.
Also, you guys, later on in the conference championship game, you got the Chicago Bears. And that's, I never heard of that. I appreciate you sharing that story because when you played the Bears that year, the score really didn't indicate, especially at halftime, but you really dominated them. And it was only 6-0 at halftime. It's crazy how sometimes games like that end up.
Well, yeah, and we had some motivation too from the previous year.
Yeah.
Because in '83, I believe we were 10-6 that year. One of our losses was to Chicago.
Yeah.
At Soldier Field, where Buddy Ryan had unveiled his 46 defense.
Okay.
And like everybody else in professional football, we did not deal with it well the first time we saw it. And we dealt with it much better in that playoff game. And our defense gave us the leeway. They gave us the time, the breathing room to slowly, methodically, kind of ploddingly at times, make ground against them. And then, field goal, touchdown, field goal, touchdown. And suddenly, you're ended up at 23-0 and you're going, damn. It's true. If they don't score, you can't lose.
Right.
Yeah. But our defense was unbelievable. But our motivation, too, was to give Buddy a little something to take home for the offseason.
Boy, it seems like he gave a lot of people motivation back then.
Regularly. Yeah. He was, and to his credit, I think he's one of the defensive geniuses that we've had in our game over the last 40, 50 years. But there's one thing, and he shares this with his kids, they couldn't keep their mouth shut.
No.
And he ran his mouth, and he talked stuff, and he was working for the perfect guy. Because Ditka, God bless Mike Ditka, because Ditka, whether it was his players or his coaches, Mike had that kind of attitude.
Yeah.
Hey, you know what? If you back it up, it ain't talking shit. It's talking truth. And it's kind of the way he dealt with them.
Need tickets to that next event? Well, at 12 Ounce Sports, we've got them with soccer anywhere in the world. Tickets to any venue, any sport. Want to go to NCAA or NFL football matches? We've got them.
Yeah.
Baseball at every level. Every Power 5 matchup is available. Don't forget, costumes and paint are optional. What's that? You want to go to Broadway? We have those too. Want to jam out? Every concert, every artist. That's right. At 12 Ounce Sports, we've got the tickets for less. 12ozsports.com/tickets. That's 12ouncesports.com/tickets.
Again, we want to thank Randy Cross earlier this year, taking time out to be with us on Captain Lou's Champions of Sports History. Just a sample of what we have with that new podcast that we're doing. Started it back in May. What we'd like to do is talk to champions, those who made their mark in sports history. And the 1984 San Francisco 49ers were, like I said, arguably one of the best NFL teams of all time, right up there with the 85 Chicago Bears, single season wise, dominant. It was such a huge run for them that year, and kind of a retribution tour, a revenge tour, whatever, but they culminated it with a big, big win in the Super Bowl, and some great stories from Randy Cross, which you can archive. You can look at those on our YouTube channels, which are at 12 Ounce Sports, and of course on the Captain Lou Sports Network on YouTube. We invite you to subscribe to those channels, and also we invite you from here on out to watch all of our broadcasts on our 24/7 channel, Dingo TV channel 217. All right, we're going to take another break. When we come back, we're going to take a look back at a conversation we had with longtime ESPN personality and Denver Gazette columnist Woody Page, as he talked about the 1997 Denver Broncos run to their first Super Bowl, and some of the other Broncos teams that didn't quite make it, but they were good as well. You're watching Captain Lou's Champions of Sports History right here on 12 Ounce Sports, Dingo TV channel 217, and the Captain Lou Sports Network on YouTube.
speak or have heard of it. So I can see the mountain range here from high rise I live in.
Boy,
Doing fine. I'm been watching the Olympics today. I've been to 15 Olympics. I've covered 15 Olympics, and so didn't have any interest in going this year. I've been to Paris, and I'm kind of trying to calm down my career, to be honest with you. Just turned 78, was inducted into the Colorado Sports Hall of Fame. A guy who played for Notre Dame wrote that I was the worst athlete in the history of the Colorado Sports Hall of Fame. And I told him in reply that I'm glad I broke his record. He played at Notre Dame and with the Denver Nuggets. Bill Hansley. So anyway, let's talk some 1997 Broncos, because that's fresh in my memory.
Well, it's funny you mentioned too that you've been covering the Broncos this will be your 50th training camp, I believe. And, those Broncos teams that you covered, I know there was a lot of heartbreak and probably nothing more so than before that 97 team than 96. A lot of folks thought that Broncos team, Woody, was going to win the Super Bowl. And they coined it the ambush at Mile High leading into that year when they lost to Jacksonville.
It's funny you should bring that up. I was going to bring that up. I think that was the best team of those three, 1996, 97, and 98. They were one of the last teams other than the Patriots to win back-to-back Super Bowls. And I don't know that the Patriots ever won back-to-back, but that stood for quite a while. But that team you're talking about, I think overall was their best team, but Jacksonville came in, and it's not a memory that, I don't really care, but Jacksonville came in as the biggest underdog in a postseason game since the Jets won Super Bowl III. They were, I think they were underdogs for about 17 to 18 points in that game. Column about, I was at the Sugar Bowl at the time, covering that, and I was going to go over to Jacksonville and just do a piece on them. That's a close trip from New Orleans, and my editor at the time, sports editor, said, "Oh, we've got a couple of guys there. We don't really need you. Just stay at the Sugar Bowl." I think that was Ohio State and maybe Alabama.
Yeah,
you're testing my memory with every question you ask or every answer I give. But I sat down in a hotel in New Orleans and wrote a column about what league did the Jacksonville Jaguars play in? I never heard of them. And I called them the Jaguars, and it became a national story when Jacksonville upset the Broncos. The coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars got up in the locker room afterward in the postgame show and held up the column that I wrote and said that he had put it under every player's door that morning and that I was the reason they won the game. And I thought that was a funny thing for a coach to say. Why don't you take credit for the game? Why don't you credit your players for winning the game? And instead, he credited a sports writer in Denver, Colorado. And as a result of that, at that time, email was in its infancy. And if you remember, all your listeners and viewers will, that's when your email would say, "You got mail." And I broke down the system. And as a result of it, I got death threats and ended up going to Jacksonville for the state sports banquet about 6 months later. They asked me to come, and I said, "Sure, I'll come, as long as you keep me in a hotel and don't tell anybody I'm in town." So that was at Sawgrass. I stayed at Sawgrass, and I got up and I said, Jackson, I apologize to Jacksonville. I came all the way from Denver to apologize to Jacksonville. And this is going to be a great city when we rebuild it. And they kind of got the clue that I was going to have fun with them, and I did. But anyway, in 97, the Broncos had a lot to prove after what happened in 96 when they lost. And that was basically, they lost the game because a guy named Washington, who was a defensive lineman, couldn't get off the field in time. And so they lost the ball. Then Jacksonville came back and scored. But in 97, they had a lot to prove. Mike Shanahan as the coach, John Elway as the quarterback. Elway reaching the climax of his career, really. without having won one, having lost 3 in the 80s.
Yeah.
And not only did they have a great year, but they beat Jacksonville in the rematch. So that, I don't know whether that really cleansed what happened in 96, but back-to-back Super Bowls at the end of Elway's career. He was the MVP in his final one. Terrell Davis was the most valuable player in 97. I'll just give you one more piece of information to a long question, short question, long answer.
No, it's all good.
Terrell Davis had really serious migraine problems in his career. Even though he'd rushed for 2,000 yards, he woke up with a bad migraine and forgot to take his medication before that game. And the trainer went over to Mike Shanahan in the first half against the Packers and Brett Favre and said to Mike Shanahan, Terrell can't go back in. He's blind. He's been blinded by the migraine, which I've never had migraines, but I understand that they have all sorts of symptoms, including you can't see, you can't really tell where you are. And Mike said to the trainer, I need him to go back in the game and be a decoy. And so Terrell agreed to do that. And Elway faked to Terrell Davis, threw to the fullback for a touchdown and put them ahead. And they ended up winning the game against the Packers. And Terrell Davis came back after he took his medication, sat in the dark during halftime with trainers around him, and was fine in the second half and ended up scoring a couple of touchdowns and rushing for like 150 yards and was the most valuable player. So there were ramifications of that game that could John Elway ever win a game? And he has a famous moment in that game where he went for what was called the helicopter. And close to the goal and rushed for a first down and flew in the air over some Packers defenders to pick up the first down, and Terrell scored there. So that's basically a summation, notes of exactly what happened. That game was in San Diego, where they had lost before to the then Washington Redskins.
Yeah.
After the Redskins set a record in the second quarter, most points scored in the quarter. They lost to the Giants and they lost to Washington. I don't even remember who they lost to the third time, but they went three Super Bowls in 4 years, and they had a dry period. Funny story, when you look back on it, Dan Reeves was a coach then of the Broncos. Mm-hmm. And he tried to trade John Elway to Washington. And they had worked out a deal with Gibbs, who was the coach in Washington, at an owners meeting. The two of them worked it out where they'd make a trade of quarterbacks, and Washington would throw in 2 or 3 other players. And Pat Bowlen, the late owner of the Broncos, was told by Reeves they were making a deal for Elway. He kind of wanted out of town, honestly, at that point, because he and Reeves didn't get along. And Bowlen put the kibosh on that trade, and as a result of it, Elway stayed here throughout his entire career, 16 seasons, and won 2 Super Bowls, and won one as a general manager. And then, as he admitted just the other day, publicly, he had told me privately, that the worst mistake he ever made in his life was not drafting Josh Allen. they might not be in the situation they've been for 8 years now.
Well, you talked about Terrell Davis, Woody, and I think a lot of fans now don't realize, to me, he was probably the most underrated running back, if not in the history of the NFL, if not one of the top 2.
Well, he did get into the Hall of Fame, as you know, Lou.
Yeah.
And, he's one of the few players. I was on the Hall of Fame committee for 20 years or so. I wasn't when he got around because I felt like that could be another entire program, how I feel about the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Because a lot of great players have been left out, and the Broncos left out until John Elway got in. Terrell, with only really 5 good seasons, was able to eventually get into the Hall of Fame, but he had such a devastating knee injury that his career came to an early end. So he was recognized because he had 2,000 yards. That's still, as a running back, that's still a sacred mark in the NFL. I think O.J. Simpson was the first to do it.
Yep.
And I think there have been maybe 4 or 5 running backs that got it. But I worked really hard at no longer being in the Hall of Fame. I could be an outside influence. And I worked hard, as a lot of other people did, to get him in. And Terrell Davis was not only MVP that season, but MVP of the Super Bowl. So John Elway really had to depend on other people. I mean, he had brought the Broncos to 3 Super Bowls in the 80s with no help. I mean, those were 3 really average teams. And they had a lead over the Giants in the first one at the Rose Bowl, 10-9, but just Phil Simms had an incredible game, 23 of 25, I think. It reminds me of Walton's in his NCAA when he made 23 out of 25 baskets. Well, Phil Simms had 23 out of 25 connections in that game, and the Broncos pulled them out. So, as you mentioned earlier, there was heartbreak in Denver in 1977, their first in the Super Bowl. Then again, 3 times in the 80s. So that's 4 consecutive Super Bowls. The only other team that's come close and now has surpassed them, caught them, the Minnesota Vikings, I think, lost 4 Super Bowls, and the Buffalo Bills have now lost 4 Super Bowls. So there are teams that have had that failure, but the Broncos were able to come back and win the 2 you talked about in 1997. Stands in the history of the Broncos. When you talk about great accomplishments, the Nuggets winning an NBA championship. You talked about the Detroit Red Wings, and they're great. That was to me one of the. I didn't see the original 6 in hockey league, but I genuinely believe that Red Wings Avalanche series for a number of years was the best in hockey for a long time. It still hasn't been duplicated, and it's gone away because you got the Red Wings in the Eastern Conference and Avalanche in the Western Conference, and they only play each other twice a year now, I think, and, maybe 4 times, but it doesn't have the same glamour, violence, and all of the adjectives that it had when the Red Wings had their great teams and the Russian front, which may not be a popular thing to say now, but the Russian front against Patrick Waugh and Joe Sakic and those guys, that was incredible rivalry. It's been about in several books, and the Detroit Lions and the Denver Broncos have not had that kind of rivalry. No. Although they played last year, I think, in Detroit, and the Lions beat the Broncos. But everybody beats the Broncos these days.
So, you mentioned, the 77 team, the Orange Crush, they had such personalities on that team. Craig Morton, comeback player of the year, so much fun to watch. And then in the 80s, and, you also mentioned the Hall of Fame, Randy Gradishar just getting into the Hall of Fame, a well-deserved honor, a little late for that, in my opinion. He's alive. So, it's like me getting into the Sports Hall of Fame. Mentioned the second time, but you want good things to happen when you're alive. Yeah.
Doug Moe was a long coach in the NBA with the Denver Nuggets, with San Antonio Spurs, and then for half a season with the 76ers. And I said to him, Doug, you got to get another job. You're like 15 games away from winning 1,000. And he said, am I going to care when I die? You got it, honestly. So I think it's one of the problems I have with the Pro Football Hall of Fame is you try and put people in and they're still alive and still in shape to actually go. I mean, we just saw a very heartbreaking story over the weekend. Chicago Bears defensive lineman in the condition that he's in now. So it's a great honor for Randy Gradishar. I always felt I got into the finals a because I called in I offered to give my firstborn to like 15 of the selection committee, and got him to the final day in 20 years ago or so, and wanted him to represent the entire Broncos from 1960 to 1977 because they had nobody in the Hall of Fame, and they were such a team in the AFL. And it came down to the final vote, and a couple of people spoke out against him. And one of them said he was going to help me out. And he actually got up and said that Randy belonged in the very good Hall of Fame.
So we mentioned, Woody, we mentioned at the top, 50 years you've been covering the Broncos. I know it's a generic question, but, you know, obviously it's changed a lot since 1974. You know, tell us a little bit about how it was back then going to a Broncos training.
I was in Memphis, Tennessee, where I grew up. I went to school at the University of Tennessee, and I was a sports columnist at a young age, which is a long story, but at 23, 24, I became a sports columnist. I covered civil rights in the South. I covered the assassination of Dr. King, and I was on the path to being a general columnist, and I got offers around the country, and I took the job in Denver over the job in Atlanta, and I had only been to Denver for a few trips, but I took the job in Denver, and my first column was, your Broncos suck. And it's not to really wasn't to make a name for myself. It was just, I grew up in the South, and you told the truth. Yeah. My parents said, always be honest. And so I wrote that column, and I got a call the next day. I'll make this short story. Got a call the next day from the PR guy for the Denver Broncos, and he said, Coach Ralston wants you in his office at 3 o'clock. And I said, hey, you can't come. It sounded like I was going to be, a player being released at the end of training camp. So I'll be in my office at 3 o'clock. You can come to my office. I didn't have an office. I had a desk next to the water fountain, actually. And people would spray water all over me all the time. And he said, really, would you do it for me? Would you come out here? So I went out, and John Ralston said, that's not the way, kid. That's not the way things are done in this town. You need to go back to New York or Boston or wherever you came from, because we support our team here. They're our Broncos, and you need to get in line with us. And I said, well, you need to get the team that's a bit better. And actually, they did have a winning record that year. And it kind of started to turn, Ralston kind of turned the team around. Yeah. And then Red Miller came in, a longtime assistant coach in the NFL, which is an interesting story. He never got a head coaching job all those years. And he was in his late 50s because he was an alcoholic, and he gave up drinking, and he really straightened out his life, and he was able to get the Broncos job, and they brought in Craig Morton, and he was brought out. And Morton had been left for dead by both the Dallas Cowboys, who had Roger Staubach. Yeah. At one time, you and I go back enough, forgive me, but one year, Tom Landry actually relayed the plays in with the quarterback. And Staubach and Morton took turns at quarterback. One would be in on first down and third down, and the other would be in on second down, or play continued. They continued switch. We've never heard of that really in the NFL since then. I don't even remember being a case before them. But they gave up on him and gave up on Morton. And Staubach had a great career there. He went to the Giants. The Giants had him for 1 year and hated him, and just basically threw him to the Denver Broncos for a backup quarterback. And he came in and made a great comeback and had 5 or 6 good years with the Broncos at the end of his career. In fact, Lou, I'll just add this, that team has never been honored by the Broncos.
Wow, really?
Never. And so Morton has been the main proponent of bringing that team back together. A lot of the players from the team have died.
Yeah.
looked it up recently, and so I pushed for it too. And so they're going to honor the 77 Broncos. They've obviously honored the 97 Broncos about every 6 months since 1997.
Yeah.
So anyway, with Morton and Red Miller, who finally given a chance to coach after about 17 years as an assistant coach, did a great job there. And they had that. I had named the team in called Ross in 76, and I said, I've given your team a name. You want me to be a big fan of you. I'm calling the team the Orange Crush. And he said, what does that mean? I said, well, it's a soft drink. I said, well, everybody, the Vikings are close enough to you. The Vikings had the Purple People Eaters. There was the Steel Curtain in Pittsburgh. There was the Doomsday Defense in Dallas at that time, and the Los Angeles Rams had a great defensive line. I can't remember what they were called, but I thought the Broncos deserved with Randy Gradishar, Tom Jackson, 4 linebackers they had. That was a team worthy of the nickname, and I gave it the Orange Crush. And in '77, that's when people really began to notice them. But after the game, one of the defensive linemen of the Cowboys in the Super Bowl in New Orleans crushed an Orange Crush can against his forehead, and he said, "That's what I think of Orange Crush." Like whack against his head, like you would do with a beer can if you were on the forehead.
I want to let you know something though, Woody. You'll like this. The high school that I went to in 1980, up on Lake Superior, Munising Mustangs, we were orange and black. That's what we called our defense. And somebody sent some type of correspondence to Denver, and Denver sent the team a whole supply of Orange Crush T-shirts. I thought you might like that.
That's good. You know what I got out of it? The Denver Broncos actually patented or copyrighted the name in '78, because the distributing company put out Orange Crush cans with Randy Gradishar and several other players on the cans. And Orange Crush, the distributing company, which wanted nothing to do with at the time, and nobody was drinking Orange Crush actually. The distributor told me a couple of years later that they had like 15 crates because he was distributing Pepsi Cola. And he said we had about 15 crates in the corner of the warehouse and we couldn't get rid of them. So they did send me a 6-pack of the Denver Crush cans that they
oh, nice
cans. So, yeah, but that's funny. A lot of teams in high school and college kind of adapted that. If orange and blue or orange was their primary color there. So that's an interesting story. But in 1997, because of what happened in '96, there was a feeling in Denver that the Broncos were never going to win a Super Bowl. And no matter what happened, they just couldn't get over the hump of losing 4 Super Bowls and then losing the AFC Championship in '96. And actually, when they went to the Super Bowl in San Diego, my newspaper said to me, they said, we want you to write a column that they win the game. And I said, well, they're probably not going to win the game. But we need it on Thursday. It's Thursday before the game. This is 1997 in San Diego. And I sat in the room and wrote a column saying the Broncos finally win. And the whole time I'm writing it, I go, boy, this is never going to see the light of day. And so you've seen this, and everybody listening to us has seen this, where at the end of the game, the Broncos hold up the newspaper and it says, Orange Crush finally wins or something. And my column is there. And I still copy that because it was something that I didn't think was ever going to happen. I just thought that it would go through, like the Vikings went through all those years where they and they lost to the Chiefs, an AFC team. That was the second loss after the Jets had won Super Bowl III and Super Bowl IV. So they had a real run there in the late 1990s. with Mike Shanahan as coach. I'm talking about people wanting to vote, and I think he's the next coach to go, and it could happen next year, I think. But they had that run, and it extended shortly into the 2000s because Peyton Manning came here in 50 after losing to the Seattle Seahawks in 48 in a blowout. I wrote in 1997, which was the theme of that was Pat Bowlen, as I said, the late owner of the Denver Broncos, got up during the post-game presentation and said, "This one's for John." And it really was, after all he'd gone through. And so when they lost 48 to the Seahawks, 38-6, I think it was 36. And my lead on my column in one, "This one's for the John."
Need tickets to that next event? Well, at 12 Ounce Sports, we've got them with soccer anywhere in the world. Tickets to any venue, any sport. Want to go to NCAA or NFL football matches? We've got them.
Yeah.
Baseball at every level. Every Power 5 matchup is available. Don't forget, costumes and paint are optional. What's that? You want to go to Broadway? We have those too. Want to jam out? Every concert, every artist. That's right, at 12 Ounce Sports, we've got the tickets for less. 12ozsports.com/tickets. That's 12ouncesports.com/tickets.
All right, many thanks to Woody Page, longtime ESPN personality. You see him a lot on Around the Horn, and of course, longtime sports writer. His 50th year covering the Denver Broncos at training camp. Quite an accomplishment. He's seen a lot of the highs, and he's seen a lot of the lows there. Whoops. For the magic of television. Sorry about that. See, we're live, right? Again, many thanks to Woody Page for joining us here on Captain Lou's Champions of Sports History. 50 years covering the Denver Broncos for the Denver Post and then the Denver Gazette. And of course, you see him a lot of times on ESPN on Around the Horn. So we really appreciate him coming on the show as well. All right. That's going to about do it here for another edition of Captain Lou's Champions of Sports History, as we want to thank Randy Cross again for being a part of the program earlier this year. And of course, Woody Page for joining us as well. That's just kind of a taste of what we've got coming up here on the show. We've got a lot of great interviews lined up on our show here in the coming months ahead, as we will concentrate on football and of course, baseball, all the major sports, all the champions that make sports history what it is. So we invite you to stay tuned for that here on Tuesday nights live on 12 Ounce Sports and Dingo TV channel 217. And of course, the Captain Lou Sports Network on YouTube. All right, that's going to do it. Until next time, Captain Lou saying, keep your heads up, keep your sticks down, keep your feet moving. And as always, keep your minds open. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll talk to you soon. So long.